All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books presents writers Samuel Autman, CJ Jenovi, Sharon Seithel, Sylvia Sukop, and Stefan Triplett, the contributors one of many contributors to the new anthology Sweeter Voices Still, an LGBT anthology from Middle America. Tonight's conversation will be led by editors Ryan Schissler and Kevin Whiteneer Jr. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 51 years, 51 and a half now. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of the incredible work of Belt Publishing, the supporters of Samuel, CJ, Sharon, Sylvia, and Stefan, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We have adapted and are currently bringing you the things that you love the most about Left Bank Books with curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating and allows us to keep this virtual event series going. So thank you for your support. We need your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. This is our second author event of the year. We did over 100 author events last year virtually. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. We will get to those at the end of the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events already lined up for this year and are adding events daily. About tonight's book, Sweeter Voices Still. The middle of America, the Midwest, Appalachia, the Rust Belt, the Great Plains, the Upper South, is a queer place and always has been. The queer people of its cities, farms, and suburbs do not exist only to serve as blue dots within red states. Every story about the kid from Iowa who steps off the bus in Manhattan ready to finally live is a story about the kid who was already living in Iowa. Sweeter Voices Still is about that kid and has been written by people like them. This collection features queer voices you might recognize, established and successful writers and thinkers, and others you might not, people who don't think of themselves as writers at all. You'll find these truths within these pages. Transgender women and men are women and men. They and them can be singular pronouns. Black Lives Matter. Sex work is work. And you don't have to go to a gay bar to be gay. And it's okay if you do, too. You'll find sex, love, and heartbreak, and all the beings we meet along the way. Trees, deer, cicadas, sturgeon. Most of all, you'll find real people. And I will introduce the speakers as they have their moment in the spotlight, but I want to introduce the editors of tonight's fantastic work. Ryan Schissler is a journalist from St. Louis, currently based in Chicago, whose work has appeared in Al Jazeera America, The Washington Post, The Guardian, The New York Times, National Geographic News, and the St. Louis Beacon. And Kevin Whiteneer Jr. is an interdisciplinary artist and art historian. He holds a master's degree from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in Modern and Contemporary Art History, Theory, and Criticism, and a bachelor's degree in art history and anthropology from Ripon College. He lives in Chicago. And now I would like to welcome all of our presenters for the evening for Left Bank Books. Everyone's going to come out of the screen all at once. Each author will have their featured moment and we'll all come together for the audience Q&A at the end of the event. And now, if everyone would help me welcome all of our participants to the evening. Hello, everyone. As I bring everyone in, so many people. This is the most people that we've ever had participate in a virtual event so far.
Thanks, Shane, and it's nice to see everyone. Like we were saying earlier, one more and we could be the Brady Bunch. So if anyone wants to slide into this, a special thanks to Left Bank Books for hosting us, my favorite hometown bookstore. I'm actually in St. Louis right now on a visit, so it's great to be here. Even if we're all here in the ether together, I still get to feel at home doing this. And special thanks to Bell Publishing, Ann Trubeck and Martha Bain and Dan Chrisman, if they're watching from Cleveland and Chicago, for supporting this project. And thanks to all of the folks joining us tonight, just a small number of our Missouri focused cohort in the anthology, and 5 of more than 60 contributors to the book overall from the Midwest and the Rust Belt and Appalachia and all the fuzzy gray areas at those edges too. Kevin, anything you want to add before we get going?
Just that I'm really excited to have all of you all here to talk about your stories and everything that went into making them. So yes, this is very exciting for me, and I can't wait for everybody to get a chance to see and hear some of the amazing stuff that we have.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, before we get started with the first reading from Samuel, I was going to take a moment, and Shane, if you could pull up those pictures when you finish consolidating us, just to remember and recognize Jean Dawson, who is one of the contributors to Sweeter Voices still, and sadly passed away last year before he could see the book be released. Jean is a longtime resident of St. Louis, originally from a small town in Iowa. When I first met him a couple years ago, I left his apartment with a hard, copy of a Kinko's Bound memoir that he had written. And from that memoir are excerpts that are published as part of the book. And though, Jean's remarkable story was part of our anthology, and even though he didn't get to see it come to fruition there, his niece Tammy was able to help him self-publish his memoirs in entirety before he passed. And that book is called Farm Boy to City Girl. And if you look that up, it's available for purchase as well. So Jean, wherever you are, we're glad that you're a part of this project too. We love you. Thanks for your life and your stories and sharing them with us. And with that, just wanted to, I guess we can introduce Samuel, who will be our first reader of the evening. Shane, I don't know if you're gonna, you're gonna.
Yep. I am ready. All right. So Samuel Autman's Wonder Boys was adapted into the award-winning short film A Long Walk, available at www.samuelautman.com. His other essays have appeared in The Kept Secret, The Half-Truth in Nonfiction, Brevity, and the St. Louis Anthology. And if everyone again would applaud for Samuel Autman.
Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Great. So I'll just give a little bit of a setup. I'm only going to read 800 words from this piece. Wonder Boys appeared initially as a piece called A Walk Through the Neighborhood, and before that, it was called Lancome Lad. So it's had a long life. It's been around for about 20 years. Anyway, so I'll just read. This is something that happened. So I call this a memoir essay. It's something that happened in my neighborhood in St. Louis, and I'll just read the first part of it. Saturday mornings in 1977 in our North St. Louis household meant wiping crust from my eyes, climbing down the bunk bed, rustling Chung, my sister, from her bunk bed. We knew Mama had placed either cornflakes, Cheerios, or Lucky Charms in plastic bowls the night before. Chung and I would immediately grab them, turn on the TV, and watch ABC's Super Friends. I liked the cartoon because Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, Robin, and Aquaman formed a superhero alliance. Chung preferred Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And the Bugs Bunny Show. Once the cartoons went off at about noon, the neighborhood kids divided up by gender and we hit the streets. I often played Nerf football in the street with the boys, our strategies and rhythms interrupted every 3 to 5 minutes by the hum of passing cars. We would stop, disperse onto either side of the street briefly, then regather on the black tar to pick up the game. Meanwhile, the girls played double dutch jump rope, their orange and red jelly bean sandals bouncing rhythmically on the sidewalk. Sometimes they acted as a cheerleading squad, patting their hands and stomping their feet in unison while making cheers, sounding often like rappers. My name is Chung. I am a Virgo. I am super bad. Power. All here. Let's cheer. In those days, the streets felt safe. We heard about burglaries or houses catching on fire, but youth and naivete insulated us from what was on the horizon for our neighborhood and generation. One time, I was outside riding bikes with neighborhood kids, Mikey, Junebug, and Tony, when we saw Steve, a kid who lived across the alley, resisting his father, Mr. Johnson, pulling him out of their red brick house, down the stairs, onto the sidewalk. "So you want to be a fucking girl? I'll make you a fucking girl," his father thundered, with a belt dangling from his fist. "No, Daddy, please, I'm sorry. Don't make me do this," he pleaded. Steve was about 9 years old, effeminate and petite. He had wide cheeks and always seemed more concerned about his face and clothes than playing on the streets with us. His father, who had to have been in his early 30s, was an ideal goateed, muscular man who sat around sucking Budweiser beer out of a can and watching the St. Louis Cardinals play on TV. During a break one time, he opened the bathroom door to find Steve, his only son, putting on lipstick. His father exploded, making his namesake put on a yellow turban, white high heel women's shoes, and a red dress. He then smeared makeup and lipstick onto his son's face in more of an exaggerated way, making him look like a clown more than a girl. Hoping to drive this tendency out of Steve, he forced him to walk around one big St. Louis block for everyone to see. So Steve began walking the eighth of a mile trek. "I'll make you a fucking girl," Mr. Johnson repeated, becoming louder as they went. "But Dad, I was just playing around," Steve said, tears and makeup commingling. "Guess what? I ain't raised no goddamn 60, so just shut up and walk." As boys who were 9, 10, and 11 years old, we thought this was the funniest thing we had ever seen. We clapped our hands and howled with laughter. Tears of humiliation streamed down Steve's face. We kept jeering, but inwardly, I was horrified by what I saw Steve's father doing to him. It made me wonder if this is the kind of treatment might have received if my parents had stayed married. Steve and I had been friends when the other boys weren't around. We bonded around the central female protagonists who populated our TV shows that we loved, really cheesy ones, like The Bionic Woman, The Secrets of Isis, Electra Woman and Dinah Girl, and the short-lived Get Christy Love, a Black undercover detective. But the one we really loved the most was Linda Carter's Adventures of Wonder Woman. Something about the way in those early episodes, audience could see her clothing disappear as she twirled around, transforming from Diana Prince to Wonder Woman. Everything from her golden lasso that forced people to tell the truth to her bracelets that made bullets ricochet. Wonder Woman reflected something neither of us adolescent boys had a vocabulary for. Steve was far more creative and fun than those other boys. I knew if the other boys saw me playing too much with Steve, I too could be pegged as a sissy. By then, I had an inkling that Steve and I weren't like the other boys, but I didn't want to associate with him too much because I didn't want the other boys in the Penrose neighborhood to call me names behind my back. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Or am I muted? Thank you, Samuel. That I love that story. Not, it's a difficult story, but your way of telling it is powerful and very poignant.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you too. I was reading along and it just took me back to the first time I was reading this, and I just really loved so many parts of this story. So I have questions. I don't know if Ryan has questions prepared, but yeah, I want to leave the floor open first.
Yeah, I think, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're going to do the readings first before we do questions.
Sure, yeah.
Or, yeah.
All right, so I will bring on the next presenter, CJ Jenovi. Janavi. No. Oh, I feel like I said it wrong the first time, and now I feel like I can't say it right the second time. Jenovi. There we go. Sorry about that.
Actually, I should just change it to Jenovi because that's what everyone says anyway.
Don't do it. The same would happen to me.
Just shame me. It's fine. Just put me in my place. All right. So CJ Jenovi is a public radio and former alt weekly journalist in Kansas City, Missouri, where she lives with her wife and 2 dogs. She is the author of No Place Like Home, Lessons in Activism from LGBT Kansas. And you can follow her on Twitter at CJ Janavi. So it's CJJANOVY. All right. And hello. A round of applause for CJ.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Samuel, for that reminder of Get Christy Love. I want to just keep reading so I can think more about Get Christy Love. Thank you to Left Bank Books and Ryan and Kevin for including me and Bell Publishing. If I was super skilled at multimedia, I would be playing music to go along with this short bit that I'm going to read. But I'm not that skilled, and I'm even if I could sing, then I would. But I'm an even worse singer than I am at multimedia. So with that caveat, the name of my story is called Lola, a Love Story, and it takes place in Lincoln, Nebraska. And just going to read you the excuse me, the opening. Several paragraphs here. So it's the summer of 1970 in a small Nebraska city where our nuclear family lives in a nice ranch home. Our mom bakes us cookies and signs us up for summer reading programs. And our dad takes off his tie and plays catch with us in the yard when he gets home from work. At night, in the room I share with my sister, lying on my twin bed, staring at a tiny green light, I'm listening to a voice that's simple and direct. I met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes just like cherry cola. I'm 7, but I understand some things. The singer is a man. He meets a woman. I know what champagne is and what happens to you when you drink it. I recognize that if it tastes like cherry cola, you'll drink a lot of it. When the singer spells out cola, C-O-L-A cola, I can tell he's enjoying it. A woman walks up and asks him to dance. My late 60s childhood has taught me that women are not supposed to ask men to dance. But the man who's singing this story doesn't seem to mind. I find her brazenness intriguing, and maybe he does too, because he asks her name. He spells it out, L-O-L-A, and repeats it, affirms it. Something in their interaction changes. The music gets louder and more forceful. The guitars so far have been acoustic, but now an electric one saunters in. Well, I'm not the world's most physical guy, but when she squeezed me tight, she nearly broke my spine. On Top 40 radio, getting squeezed tight is a good thing. Having your spine nearly broken doesn't sound so good, but he's singing Oh My Lola, and in Top 40 radio music, oh my is a good thing. And he's spelling out her name again, repeating it, affirming it. Well, I'm not dumb, but I can't understand why she walked like a woman and talked like a man. He's struggling with something. The feelings I'm getting from the song begin to disconnect. I'm 7, so I know the feeling of being not dumb, but not understanding something. Someone walking like a woman, but talking like a man doesn't confuse me because he's explaining it so matter-of-factly. Then, once again, he says she's his, my Lola. Spells her name, repeats it, affirms it. The man and the woman drink champagne and dance all night. Lola picks him up and sits him on her knee. I understand that this, too, is backwards. She must be bigger than the man who's singing, and it's a funny image. But he doesn't seem uncomfortable to be on her knee. She invites him to come home with her. This does not seem frightening because the music feels good, as if she's picking us up and carrying us with her. Well, I'm not the world's most passionate guy, but when I looked in her eyes, well, I almost fell for my Lola. Now his feelings are almost confusing. If he's not that passionate, it makes sense that he almost fell for her. But then why does he call her my Lola? I think he fell for her. His argument with himself seems silly. Then he sings her name 5 times in a row, la 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 Lola. So it's obvious how much he's fallen for her. Then he pushes her away, he walks to the door, he falls on the floor, he gets down on his knees, Any 7-year-old knows this is just the radio drama of adults in love. And then the two stare deeply into each other's eyes. This is how he always wants it to be. What he says next arrives clearly across the Midwestern airwaves. Girls will be boys and boys will be girls. So I'll stop there. The rest of the essay sort of speeds through 50 years of pop culture. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, CJ. What I always was struck most about your opening part of your piece was just how well you articulate like the experience of being a child and figuring things out, which I think is just such a common thing, and you articulate it so well. So really looking forward to digging into that with you too.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's so much like despite you say that you're a kid in the 60s and I was a kid in the 90s, and there's just something so like relatable about that. So yeah, I really love that framing.
Awesome.
And next we have Sharon. Hello, Sharon. So Sharon Seithel is a lifelong Missourian born in Cape Girardeau. She currently resides in St. Louis with her wife, Carol, and their 3 dogs. Excuse me. She recently retired from a career in technology and dreams of becoming a writer, activist, and amateur historian. And a round of applause for Sharon.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate Belt Publishing putting this beautiful volume out. Let me know if you can hear me. I was having a little technical troubles earlier, but hopefully it's better. I am going to read from my essay, Tommy and Jane, and as I read, you'll see some photos that are courtesy of the Missouri Historical Society, and that actually is a photo of Jane. So let me get started. Tommy started walking around my neighborhood when I was about 12. I remember she was always dressed in a tan trench coat, slacks, and sensible shoes. Her walk seemed to be one with purpose, head down. She did not meet my gaze when we met on the sidewalk. I had heard she had a heart attack, and I suspected that the walking was a suggestion from the doctor. Tommy and Jane were my next-door neighbors for 18 years. In researching their lives, I found that the 2 women bought the house on Sunset Boulevard in Cape Girardeau during the 30s. My parents bought the house next door in the 50s, and I was born a few years later. I didn't know it then, but Tommy's given name was Elaine Davis, and Jane was Mary Jane Barnett. But to me, they were just my neighbors, Tommy and Jane. I was a full-on tomboy, preferring to play cowboy or soldier and wear pants when I could get away with it. I had a Gene Autry revolver, a rifle, and a football, and my dad's World War II military gear. He indulged, and my mother tolerated most of my childhood loves. There was never once a word about my boyish ways that connected me to Tommy, who was clearly the butch in the relationship. I was fascinated. I never had much interaction with her, noticing that she was much more masculine in appearance. I always wondered if things would have been different if I were a boy. Jane, on the other hand, was friendly and always bought a box or 2 of Girl Scout cookies when I knocked on their door. I knew Jane was different because she was fabulously feminine. My mother wore practical scarves and skirts, but Jane was glamorous. And more than once, I saw her leave the house in what I can only assume was a mink fur coat. They drove a white Lincoln Town car, which was not a common vehicle in our working class neighborhood. They were quiet neighbors, and now I know that they were born just after the turn of the century and were in their 50s and 60s when I was a kid. The spring and summer of 1978 was the beginning of my awakening. Until then, I don't have a memory of consciously connecting who I was to who Tommy and Jane were, but I have one very vivid memory around that time, the arrival of my date for the high school prom. I was going with a guy named Mark. Not because being with him was important to me, but I knew that being part of prom was important to me. It was a rite of passage. My mom was overjoyed to help me buy the dress. Before we left, there were photos to take, and we were outside in front of my house. I expected that I would be focused on the flowers, the dress, maybe even Mark. Instead, I was acutely aware of what Tommy and Jane might be thinking. On the surface, I wanted them to see that I was not like them. But deep down, I think that might have been the moment I realized I was exactly like them. That I too would be the town queer. When I fully came out a couple years later, we had moved to another part of Cape Girardeau, and I never saw Tommy or Jane again. And I'll stop there. That is one of the photos that just popped up. It was absolutely one of my favorites, but they're all just amazing photos.
Sorry.
You're muted, Ryan. I was also muted, and I was trying to tell you you were muted while I was muted. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, Sharon, I was thinking, how lucky we are that, these photos ended up at the Historical Society, and, how amazing it is that we can put these beautiful pictures and faces to the names that you have of your memories of living next to them. It's a beautiful piece. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Next up is going to be Sylvia.
Shane, you're also doing a great job with all of us.
It's a bunch of just clicking things, so.
So that is CJ that you just brought back. So.
Oh. Just when you tell me I'm doing a good job. There we go. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi.
All right. Sylvia Sukop completed her MFA at Washington University in St. Louis in 2018, and her work has appeared in Waxwing, Exposure, and other publications. She teaches creative writing and is working on her first book, a memoir. And everyone at home, if you would welcome Sylvia with a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I just want to thank our host, Left Bank Books, and Kevin and Ryan for including my work in this amazing anthology. My essay in the book is adapted from one originally published in Palimpsest, which is a literary journal out of Yale University. It was in their special trans issue. I am grateful to KB Fraser, who is now a rabbinic student in Philadelphia, who generously shared his story with me and endured my many questions during a series of interviews back in 2017 when he still lived in St. Louis. So it's both a profile of KB and a meditation on the meaning and transformative uses of sound and of sonic energy. So I'm going to read I'll be kind of skipping around in the essay, reading some excerpts. The essay is titled Sonic Healing in St. Louis. At the Center for Hearing and Speech, a St. Louis audiology clinic, Dr. Koach Baruch Fraser wears a blue lab coat, and low on his left lapel, a small pin, a close-up image of an ear. The ear on the pin is a shade of brown resembling Fraser's own skin tone, and until I pointed it out to him, he did not realize he had placed it on his heart. Listening with the heart is one side of a sonic equation that has defined Fraser's life. As the center's chief of audiology, he sees hundreds of patients a year at 2 different clinic locations, one in a well-to-do, mostly white southern suburb of St. Louis, and one in a majority African-American neighborhood on the low-income north side. In this divided city, the doctor is known for his gentle manner and ability to forge compassionate relationships with patients across a broad spectrum of backgrounds and needs. In over a decade of practice, Fraser, who is in his late 30s, has seen all the ways that difficulty hearing can lead to debilitating social isolation and diminished quality of life. Addressing hearing impairment, he says, is about reconnecting people to their lives. In settings far removed from the hushed and sterile space of the clinic, a different but equally vital aspect of Fraser's sonic identity finds expression. Playing a large djembe drums strapped to his 5'5" frame, the percussionist and singer has been at the center of major protest marches from the streets of Ferguson to downtown St. Louis. A longtime racial justice and LGBTQIA activist, he has a gift for channeling the often volatile energy of a public demonstration into resolutely nonviolent collective chanting. His djembe drum takes its name from a saying of the Bambara people in West Africa, Anke Je, Anke Be, or everyone gather together in peace. Fraser also plays the djembe in religious settings, including every Friday night at Central Reform Congregation, CRC, in St. Louis's Central West End, where he serves as a cantorial soloist and song leader. It was in CRC's bright, modern sanctuary that I first encountered Fraser that summer, drumming and singing. A composer and liturgical innovator, he is known for blending musics from different traditions while making it accessible to everyone. A newcomer to St. Louis, I had been shul shopping, and I figured it would take time to find a community that felt as Hamish or homey to me as the one that I had just left after 2 decades in Los Angeles. That community, Bet Chaim Chadashim, House of New Life, had the historical distinction of being the world's first gay and lesbian synagogue, founded in 1972 in the early days of the gay liberation movement. I soon learned that, like me, Fraser grew up Christian, and while committed to a life of God-centered community, the one he was born into was not the one he felt he ultimately belonged to. Both of us would find our true spiritual home in Reform Judaism, fully affirmed in our queer and Jewish identities. From the first time we met, I read Fraser as trans, although I didn't need to rely solely on my queer radar, for his identity as a trans man was not merely a known fact at CRC Synagogue, but was communally embraced and celebrated. The entire congregation knew that Koach would be undergoing top surgery in the fall, just ahead of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and that he would celebrate his bar bat mitzvah the following spring. He made the unusual decision to maintain the reference to both genders in the ritual's title, bar for male and bat for female. Coming into his authentic identities has been a long process, but one he feels he was destined. I really believe I always have been a Jew. I just didn't have any words to describe it. Like I've always been trans. I just didn't know what to call being trans. I just knew that I was this thing different from everyone else around me, but I didn't know what to call it. Embodying these multiple intersectional identities has not been easy due to the many questions, curious looks, and outright discrimination with which Fraser is confronted in the various spaces he inhabits, from the clinic to the sanctuary to the streets. But it is through voice, his own and that of others, and through sonic energy that he navigates and shapes his daily experience and impact in the world. People tend to think of sound as immaterial, as something that floats invisibly through the air without physical presence. But researchers who study sound have long recognized its physical properties, without which we would not be able to hear it. Our bodies are designed to receive sound, especially, but not exclusively, our eardrums that transmit sound vibrations from the air to the ossicle bones in the middle ear, and from there to the inner ear's fluid-filled cochlea. Vibration in air is thus converted to vibration in fluid. Sound enters the body. We contain it. But in Fraser's experience, sound also has the capacity to contain us. When a shared sonic experience is created with intention, such as communal singing or chanting, the vibrational energy can be shaped and guided in order to hold a group together. It works through music, through prayer, and also through chanting in a protest context. When Reverend Tracy Blackman, pastor of Christ the King UCC in Florissant, was organizing the Mothers' March for Justice in October 2014 to take place in Clayton, she asked Fraser to lead the gathering with his drum. Fraser had by then become known for his nightly presence on the streets of Ferguson in the wake of Michael Brown's killing 2 months earlier on August 9th, 2014. Reverend Blackman's intention, says Fraser, was for the Mothers' March to be silent. It was almost to be walking around like Joshua, he says, referring to the biblical scripture in which God instructs Joshua to have the people march in silence around the city of Jericho once each day for 6 days, and then after circling it 7 times on the 7th day to sound the trumpets and let loose mighty shouts, so mighty that their sonic force would bring the walls down. Within the silence that Reverend Blackman envisioned, says Fraser, she wanted me to drum, just me. And I remember it was Shabbos. Here's this Black trans Jew leading this group of women who are grieving their children, mothers who lost their kids to police violence and to other kinds of violence. He shakes his head, seemingly incredulous. Because some of the marchers were not able to complete more than one circuit, the group stopped at that point, and without prompting, wailing and keening began. It broke my heart, Fraser says softly, adding that, again, it was the sound that held the group in their grief. It's a container. It's there to allow people to experience, he says. They didn't need words. What happened that day at the Mothers' March echoed a moment from Fraser's childhood that he will never forget. One of my classmates died very suddenly. I went to the viewing. I remember the church was empty. Just the mother was there. It was an open casket. I was walking back after giving my condolences. The mother started wailing. I can't imagine what it must be like to look at a casket containing your child. The sound of a mother's voice wailing because they lost their child. How do you not be affected by that? That's what I wish my Jewish family would understand, he says, alluding to the many Jews he knows that have failed to engage with the realities of racial violence. He says, you can't unhear that. You can't unhear a mother wailing. If we transplant ourselves back in Germany, in Poland, that sound, what do you do with that? Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Yes, thank you so much. That was such a good piece.
I know, KB. And that's so moving.
Shane, you know KB, right? He's very well known to St. Louisans. Yeah.
Yeah.
In all these spheres that I talk about in the essay, these 3 different spheres.
Yeah. A familiar person for many of us.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Stefan, I think, yep, there we go. All right, so next up is Stefan. So, Stefan Triplett is a Black queer nonfiction writer and poet from Joplin, Missouri. He received his MFA in nonfiction from the University of Pittsburgh, where he currently teaches. And if everyone at home would give a round of applause for Stefan. Hello.
Hi, Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be at an event with Left Bank Books. I went to college in St. Louis and bought many books from Left Bank, and so it's nice to sort of feel like I'm back there again. And I'm honored to be in such an expansive and inclusive anthology as well. I keep looking at the object and the cover. It's just more beautiful than I could have imagined. So thank you so much. The piece I'm reading from is called On a Bridge, and it takes place in Joplin. And in the story, I am 17 years old. This was around 2009. So I'll just read a bit from the beginning. Here was a church I had gone to, another there, and yet another there again. Pointing them out to Mark was an easy way to fill the silences. Each time we passed one that I knew, I kept one hand on the steering wheel, excitedly pointing my index finger through the glass. I struggled to find enough interesting things to do to fill an afternoon in my hometown. Scrabble, Starbucks, a tour of the mall, the little art museum, and now the churches. That seemed to cover everything that the town had to offer. I'd planned the park as our last destination. The two of us followed the sidewalk that weaved around the playground, like the one I bloodied in the 4th grade. Young and clumsy, I had tripped and slammed my face into a plastic hexagonal roost. I bit deep into my lip, teeth breaking and busting out. I was silent at first, then felt a stinging, saw the blood, and began to wail. "Is he gonna die from this?" a classmate asked my teacher. I told Mark this story, praying he wouldn't find me boring. I told him stories of all the times I'd been here before, how my grandmother used to babysit and take me and my cousins here, my white cousins, how friends and I still came here at night during the summer, swinging back and forth until we needed to make curfew, and about the time a nearby resident called the cops on me, suspicious of the young man in the car. An invisible rope pulled my stomach toward him, though I made sure not to stand too close. I was 17, and I remember thinking, this is what a real crush feels like. I kept my hands in my black zip-up. In the nighttime, the light from the street lamps didn't reach this far. We followed the path to one of the only areas that was lit, the little bridge near the gazebo. He stopped in the middle of it, leaning against one side of the bridge. I mirrored his actions, leaning on the side opposite from him, unsure of what to do next. Waiting, I noticed the grass was still alive and green in December. Then Mark stood up from the wooden rail. He was directly across from me, beginning to close the gap between us. Someone from the neighboring houses across the street could see us if they looked hard enough. 2 hours earlier, Mark told me he couldn't live in a town so small, so conservative. "You have to come to Kansas City," he said. His hair was black and swirly and hung out from under his beanie. The dark waves rolled around his forehead as he moved. This is where his heritage showed the most, the hair of his Mexican father. His skin was pale this time of year, lighter than mine, which had faded as well in these months without much sun. The trickle of the small man-made stream looped in the background as the early winter chill surrounded us. He inched closer as I stood frozen, watching him read my face. I could feel it coming. A moment played out in movies by pairs that didn't look like us. His eyes were looking right at me. Could he sense my hesitation? Was he scared like me? I held his glance, then looked away, not knowing what to say. I kept my hands in the pocket of my hoodie and shifted against the rail. He kept smiling, and I tried to see anything but lips. His jeans were dark and skinny, the same pair he wore when we met at that college visit a few months back. His figure was petite, and I saw its edges defined in the layers that hung on his torso. "I want to kiss you," he said. My stomach squeezed into itself. I stood up straight and inched off of the rail. I thought about what to say, but no words came out. It wasn't a question. It required no answer. The space between us tightened as he moved closer. All feeling went to my temples, and I watched the place where his words left, pulling in like a magnet towards me. His smell surrounded me, and I felt breath and body heat. I felt a boy's lips on mine for the first time. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's so beautiful. I can't wait to talk about it.
Thank you.
I love also just the number of first kiss stories that are in this book.
Totally.
So different, but just so like relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that concludes our readings. Shane, if you want to bring everyone back, I know, Kevin, you have a lot of questions.
I do.
So maybe I'll let you kick off the conversation and we'll just go from there. And to folks watching, I know Shane is watching for questions. So if you have a question for all of us or someone in particular, feel free. We'd love to talk with you too.
Awesome. All right. So I guess I'll start with Stefan's piece because you just read it. And I'm already turned to it. And there were two things in particular that just like really stood out to me. And thankfully they are in the section you just read. So everybody's kind of got a grounding in it. The first one is not so much a question, but just like an observation and just something that really stood out to me when we were reading your piece. And it's, you said that 2 hours earlier, Mark told me he couldn't live in a town so small, so conservative. You have to come to Kansas City, he said. And that moment just like really stood out for me when I was reading this the first time, because it's exactly what this book is about. It's exactly about this like idea that, oh, queer people, we couldn't possibly survive in small towns, you know, or like those places aren't meant for us or something. And so I just really wanted to highlight that and ask you a little bit about your thoughts, especially because they're like situated in this like broader piece about something that's antithetical to that statement.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for pointing to that moment and seeing something there or feeling something there. You know, as I was drafting this, that was something that sometimes I wondered, sort of, especially when I'm thinking of audience. I, you know, sort of was unsure of who that would resonate with, or there's parts of it in which, like, you know, comparatively, right, Joplin is smaller and might be more conservative, but for a lot of people, maybe Kansas City is also those things, small and conservative. And so I do like that it showed at that age. And I, you know, I can still sort of remember what that felt like. You feel so bound to a place. And when there aren't sort of examples or like representations, whether it's on the TV or in the music you're listening to, of like life being able to exist there, or queer life being able to exist there, it's like hard to realize in the moment that you are that person living there, right? And so at this time in the story, like I was not out publicly. However, you know, it would be false if I said or didn't believe that there weren't other people in my high school at the time who were also queer or who were not out. I think it's interesting to sort of get so caught up in your own narrative and the details of that, which, you know, I'm saying a lot here, but I think there is so much wrapped up in like the small moments of this like small location. And so that's, you know, I kept the piece sort of in this park for the first half. Because I feel like there's just like so much in that little snapshot of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for just like pointing at that like idea of subjectivity, like how Joplin is small and conservative to someone, but like Kansas City can be the same thing to someone else, you know? I grew up in Chicago my entire life, and, you know, there's always this kind of like rhetoric that happens where it's very like diminutive, like to just like talk about areas that you've never even been to, like right. Kansas City is like just like an off-color comment about Kansas City because we live in Chicago and it's like 3 million people and it's considered a city, you know. So I love that subjectivity. So thank you for pointing at that.
Yeah. Kevin, the point that you know saw in that piece about you know, I could never live in a town this small and this conservative actually reminded me of what I know, you know, comes at the end of Sharon's piece, which is Cape Girardeau, you know, no liberal utopia in its own right. Sharon talks about that being the birthplace of Rush Limbaugh, and a place, you know, that small and that conservative also is where Tommy and Jane have their life. And, you know, that doesn't mean there aren't things that are difficult about living in places like that. But I think, you know, just pushing back against this narrative that small places or conservative places or rural places are just inherently contradictory to queer life is worthy. to push back against.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, I don't know if you want to maybe expand on that part a little bit of your piece.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's such an interesting topic because even though I did see Tommy and Jane live their life, and knowing that that they were born at the turn of the century, that they were literally living this life in Cape during the 50s and 40s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s and 60s. And yeah, out of Cape, as you mentioned, in that very neighborhood, Rush Limbaugh sprung out of that. And so I think for me, what was interesting as I was going back and writing this was how maybe much better it was when they were there than it actually is today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also mark that spot to talk to you about because there's the end of that piece is just so amazing because it's speculative for a moment about like what would Rush's life have been like if Tommy and Jane were his neighbors, you know, and like what if they weren't your neighbors? And I think that's something that I personally have thought about all the time. It's like, oh, if I didn't have like grandparents who were so supportive, or oh, if I didn't have parents who were so young, or oh, if I didn't have yada, 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 how would I be today? Or how would my life have been changed? And I think that's not necessarily anything that queer people think more about than anybody else, but I do think that there are like built-in moments to our lives that we pose that question. We pose that question of, if I didn't have like this, you know, reference or this supporter or this image in my life, what would have happened for me?
Sylvia, I'd be interested to hear from you about this because, you know, like many people who live in the Midwest, you're from somewhere else. Oh, sorry, Sharon. I think there was a delay and I talked over you. But Sylvia, you know, you mentioned your piece, you came to St. Louis after 20 years in Los Angeles, you know, where perhaps, you know, St. Louis might be the small conservative place that you moved to relative to that. What's your experience been, you know, being from somewhere else in this region?
Yeah, so we actually have to go a little bit back in time to the fact that I was raised in a town probably smaller, maybe smaller than any of you, like literally like 1,000 residents or something. I'm not sure the exact population, but it's a place small enough that it has the designation of village, not even town, in Pennsylvania. So so I grew up in a very small, isolated community. And I went to Catholic schools and, had young immigrant parents. And so I did grow up in a pretty conservative sort of small town background, like, took an hour on a school bus each way, to get to school by the time we made all the stops. So but anyway, I guess the point is that although I did most recently live in Los Angeles for 20 years, and in many ways I still kind of carry my Angelino identity, haven't quite shaken it yet, but not that I even want to. I know some of my Los Angeles friends are tuning in tonight. But the point is that for me, like actually St. Louis, first of all, the size of it was kind of a relief after Los Angeles, just in terms of like its footprint in the, its physical footprint, how far one has to go to get places. And just that kind of gift of being able to feel more connected to friends. Here, it's so easy to kind of like get together or go places. I mean, I'm talking, of course, in a non-COVID time, which blessedly I moved here in 2016, so had some years to get sort of get rooted and get acquainted here and get plugged in. So I think, but there are definite, I don't know, I really embrace St. Louis. I think there's a lot of qualities about a smaller town, smaller city that are really, positive. And I don't know. and I think, again, I have so much, coming from an even smaller place, I have so much respect for these overlooked, little parts of the country, and it doesn't, I mean, here's a great example. When I left my hometown to go to college in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, I went to Bucknell University. Lewisburg is a small town, if you know Pennsylvania at all. But it's a college town. But the point is, I felt like for me that was the biggest thrill, to go to like a college town, to go live in a college town for 4 years, which had like a movie theater and cafes and a river, and it, I don't know, it just felt like such a so this thing about scale, size of communities, and that fact that even within conservative places, you always find pockets. Eventually you'll find pockets of diversity and of non-mainstream people outside the mainstream. So
yeah,
those are just some of my quick thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And Shane, I saw you dropped in our little back end chat that we have an audience question for CJ.
So CJ, Nancy, my friend Nancy, I love Nancy, is asking, did the song Lola help you think about not only the characters of Lola and the singer storyteller, but also about yourself?
Great question. Thank you. I think it made me want to be a grown-up, mostly. I think it just made me be fascinated with adults and whatever they were doing. I had not yet figured out at that age that I was gay, but I think years later when I began to think back about how that song had made such a huge impression on me, I feel like it was one of those experiences as a child that opened my mind. And so really, I think formed some kind of mindset that made it easier for me to form my own identity later and find my people later, maybe.
Yeah, I love that comes back to this idea again of like that rogue image or that rogue song that just what if you never saw that? And that I actually had a kind of like observation about Samuel's piece too, because I am such a Wonder Woman stan. Like I grew up, despite being born in the 90s, if anyone remembers, Wonder Woman was on syndication in the 90s on the Sci-Fi Channel. And so that was my like first kind of pop cultural moment where I was like, wow, I am gay and I love her. So yeah, there was something in that piece that just really like brought that out of me that I loved so much. And I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's so wonderful that the movie's back out now. They have the Gal Gadot and the second Gal Gadot one, Yes, I think growing up Black and queer in St. Louis, I think my imagination was my invisible airplane. I think it was my refuge. And I think navigating like the boys in the neighborhood and my friend and trying to figure it all out kind of really made me the man I am today. Yeah. So I'm working on a memoir now. So this whole, this piece has been around, if you saw the short film, it just won't go away. So I'm now working on a memoir where all the chapters are named for TV shows. I'm gonna have a whole chapter called "The Adventures of Wonder Woman." I just can't get away from like the way the TV impacted us, and so I think it was a way to kind of escape the harsh realities of my background. Yeah. So.
Yes. I'd love to hear it. I can't wait to see all of the other TV shows that are, tied with this like queer experience and this queer identity. I really can't wait to like leap through that.
The table of contents is going to look like the old TV guides.
It exactly does. I mean, it starts with like Family Affair. If anybody remembers Family Affair, I'm actually that old. Family Affair, and it goes all the way through to the Cosby Show. It's like a 15-year period. Yeah. So also, I think pop culture allows us to sort of have a bouncing off point. I had been working on something else that was so kind of trapped in these other, sometimes memoir can like smother on its own juices. And so my hope is that the TV opens it up for other people to think about the relationships they have with shows. I mean, you all have your shows that you grew up with, right? It's like a part of your cultural DNA. So that's what I'm really hoping. Yeah.
Yeah. Samuel, in a kind of, in a sort of spin-off way, talking about TV shows and fiction just reminded me that, before the event started, you were saying that this semester you're teaching a class on LGBTQ nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if maybe, I know this isn't directly about your piece, but since that's kind of where your head is at right now, maybe you could talk a bit about nonfiction queer storytelling in the Midwest and kind of why it's important and why it's needed.
Well, I'm so grateful. This is my second Belt anthology. I'm so happy I was in part of the St. Louis anthology. So I think I live in rural Indiana, like halfway between Indianapolis and Terre Haute. So it could be like really scary, right? But we have transgender people on city council. My previous college president was gay. So I think it's really important to amplify our voices and let people know that we're everywhere. And so that's what I'm hoping. The first time I taught a previous version called Queering the Memoir, I had 7 kids. Well, this time I've got like 14, which is big for us. Yes, I think the times have changed. I think the internet makes life easier in a small town like where I am, where I would be out of my mind. Yeah. So I think it's important to be out there and telling the stories in whatever format online. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. I think it's important for people to know we are everywhere.
Yeah. And that one of my favorite parts of how this anthology ended up is just the breadth of storytelling mechanisms that the contributors have used. We have essays and profiles like Sylvia wrote, and memoirs and poems, and there's even a song from a musical that someone wrote in there too, a letter. There's just so many different ways for folks to have that voice and to tell their own stories, and that's one of my favorite parts of how this thing landed personally. Yeah. Shane, I saw that we have another question.
So this is for you, Ryan and Kevin. How did you come up with the cover design? Tammy says they love the birds.
Yes.
Yeah.
The cover design.
The cover came from Belt's cover designer.
Mm-hmm.
So props to them for putting together this beautiful cover. We had, several options to kind of look at and discuss. But I know that the cover was inspired by the title, which all credit goes to Kevin for that. Maybe kind of a back end of the cover story is the title story. So Kevin, I'll let you talk about that.
Sure, yeah. So kind of after we had gotten all of our pieces in and we were doing all of our editing and we were like, these are our final ones, that is when we had to come up against the title. And the title is always the hardest part. Like, there's something very difficult and like gut wrenching about like telling people, sorry, we can't like have your piece in this one. And those happens for all kinds of reasons. But the title is the truly hardest part, because in an anthology work like this, you have so many people coming from all kinds of experiences and different literal places, different emotional places, different cognitive places, and trying to do justice to all of those people is so hard. So I was sitting at my desk and I was like, okay, let me see what I can find that is like, resonant throughout all of these works as much as possible, but isn't too cliche. So, there were like, I spent some time trying to like throw words down, like single words, until like I came to this point that it was like voices. Voices are what are driving this entire piece. And there was something so heart-wrenching, but like so familiar about all of these works. Like they would just tear you, some of these pieces can really tear you apart. But like at the end of it all, you have this like kind of glow, this, like, I do at least. I have this like glow after reading all of these works, just like, oh my God, I feel so good and I feel so seen and I feel so connected. And so that's where the sweetness came from. That was where like that word came to me, because it's so, when I say it, it sounds so corny, but I realize I'm being kind of like self-conscious. But it was like, despite how like gut-wrenching some of these pieces can be, they're so sweet. Like you connect to the people and you hear the sweetness and the familiarity and the connectivity between us all, even when there are differences. And so that's how the title came to me. It's like these voices are still sweet, even when they're telling you these incredibly like just tear-jerking stories. So, and then to get to the kind of like cover design, we were like, again, drawing on like something that was familiar between each one of these pieces. And so we were like, there's so much beautiful nature that's happening in here. And we also want to make sure that we were like visually recognizing the kind of like landscape that we're in. And so eventually we got to this like really great design. When they sent this design over, I was like, stop the press. Just don't bother making anything else. That is it. So yeah, we like threw around some stuff again about voices, and like speech patterns and like all of these different kinds of things. And this was it. So yeah.
And I think that sweetness you speak about is really one of the things that we talked about early on as far as our vision for this book, which is, you know, there are a lot of experiences that LGBTQ people have that are hard and terrible and traumatic. And, you know, we hold those and recognize them and we see them. But so much of the portrayal and storytelling about queer people is that we're all miserable and suffering all the time. And that's just not true. Okay. Like, you know, despite all of that, we have beautiful lives and things that we enjoy and moments of happiness and love and boredom and mundanity and normalcy. And so it's, you know, we had talked really early on about pushing back against that perpetual suffering narrative. And even though a lot of these pieces, as you said, really tear you apart, they all, you feel that warmth, you know, in them. And I think the title really captures that really well. And also, birds are beautiful and sweet too. They tweet. So yeah, it works for me, but I'm very literal.
So I want to, I know we've gone a little bit long. So the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank everyone that participated tonight, everyone that watched tonight. It has really been so great to be in such a whole queer community crowd. It's been a while in like pandemic times for me to be just completely surrounded by queer people. So thank you all so much for being here, for doing this event. It's really meant a lot to me. I know from the comments that a lot of the audience has really enjoyed and appreciated this event as well. Thank you so much for writing what you've written. Kevin and Ryan, thank you so much for composing this anthology and putting it together and making it such a beautiful collection, such a beautiful work. So on behalf of Left Bank Books, I know that Chris is watching as well from home. I don't know if Jay is as well, but we are so happy to have done this event, and thank you everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you everybody so much for coming, and thank you to our contributors. I just can't get over how much I have loved working with all of you, and how amazing this has been. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And KB's here too. Yay! All right. Have a good night. We will see you next time.
Bye.